Welcome to today's custom-tailored deep dive. We're really glad you are here with us today.
Absolutely. It is great to be here and to have you joining us.
So for this journey, we're jumping right into a pretty fascinating set of excerpts. The document is titled simply 017 Measuring What Matters.pdf.
Right.
And our mission today is to explore this quiet but honestly really urgent question that's facing anyone in a leadership role right now.
Yeah, it's a critical one.
Right. The question is, are we actually measuring what matters most? Or, are we simply measuring what makes us feel successful?
It's the kind of question that just makes you stop dead in your tracks, isn't it?
Oh, totally.
Especially in today's highly scrutinized, really resource-constrained environment.
Yeah. And I have to say, I was genuinely excited about how this text tackles what it calls the tyranny of what can be counted. Because, it is so easy to just default to measuring what's easy.
Right, the low-hanging fruit.
Exactly. We count attendance, we look at budgets, we track outputs, and we so easily mistake those numbers for real transformation.
We really do. But before we get too deep into that, I think it's crucial to lay out a little foundational context for you listening.
Yeah, please do. And either way, I love the visual backdrop you've got going on today. That warm, ancient library study vibe.
Yeah.
It really fits the theme of wisdom we're digging into.
Thank you. Yeah, I felt it was appropriate for today's text because the material we are looking at today, it is not anti-numbers.
Right, which, to be honest, was my initial fear when I saw the topic. I thought we were just going to bash spreadsheets.
Not at all. It isn't arguing that leaders should burn their spreadsheets, close their eyes, and just hope for the best.
Okay, good.
The premise here is that biblical faithfulness and meaningful accountability are actually allies.
Mm-hmm.
The crisis isn't that we measure things. The crisis is what we have decided matters most.
Mm-hmm.
Because when people use the word faithfulness as a shield to avoid any real accountability, well, good intentions can quietly replace wise stewardship.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the invitation here is to redefine our metrics, to move toward a richer way of seeing success that honors genuine transformation, but without sacrificing rigor.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because early on, there's this fascinating breakdown of how modern mission-driven leadership has quietly absorbed the logic of the industrial and corporate world.
Right.
As organizations grew over the last century, we just naturally borrowed tools from business. We brought in key performance indicators,
Yeah.
exactly, KPIs, strategic planning, efficiency models.
Which on the surface makes perfect sense. If you have a large organization, you need tools to manage it.
Totally. But the argument here is that this kind of unexamined pragmatism creates its own theology.
Yes.
In other words, if you blindly adopt whatever business tool works fastest, you accidentally start worshiping speed and efficiency without even realizing it.
It becomes the ultimate goal.
Right. You create a system where what can be easily counted becomes what is valued,
Right.
and what cannot be graphed just becomes expendable.
What's fascinating here is the stark contrast drawn between a market economy and God's economy.
Yeah, break that down for us.
Well, in a market economy, value is determined by demand, speed, efficiency, and highly visible growth.
Right.
Productivity is rewarded immediately. Waste is ruthlessly eliminated. If a program isn't scaling, you cut it.
The seduction of scale. It's all about that line moving up and to the right on the dashboard.
Precisely. But God's economy operates on a completely different set of principles. In that economy, value is determined by obedience.
Yeah.
Time is incredibly elastic.
Elastic.
Waiting isn't seen as a waste of time. It is seen as formative. And hiddenness isn't viewed as a failure, but often as necessary preparation.
Which flies in the face of literally everything we are taught in modern leadership seminars.
It really does. Growth still happens, but it happens on a slower timeline. Think of the classic metaphors the text points to. A seed buried in the soil, or yeast quietly working through dough. None of those images are fast. None of them are efficient. But all of them are alive. The underlying principle is that real fruit is not manufactured on an assembly line. It is grown.
That distinction really hits home. Think about it for a second. Do you ever feel that pressure to manufacture quick, visible fruit in your own life or work?
I think we all do.
Yeah, that constant nagging feeling that you need to produce immediate, quantifiable results rather than waiting for true, deep transformation to happen naturally, it is an exhausting burden to carry.
It leads straight to burnout. And
Yeah.
ironically, it often leads to missing the actual goal.
Exactly. There's this brilliant paradox pointed out in the material. It says, we are winning according to the metrics we celebrate, while completely losing according to the measures Scripture prioritizes.
That is a heavy realization.
It really is. But again, to be clear, God does use numbers. They just have a deeply specific purpose.
I was actually surprised to see the contrast between two very different biblical leaders who both decided to count their people.
Yes, the censuses. Right. You have Moses on one hand and King David on the other. Walk me through why those two moments are viewed so differently in the text.
It comes down to motivation and alignment. With Moses, the census in the wilderness was commanded by God. It was aligned with practical care, organizing the tribes, and covenantal stewardship.
So it's practical.
Very practical. He was assessing what he had in order to actually care for the community.
So,
David's census, however, was driven entirely by ego.
right.
It was about pride. He wanted to measure his own military strength to see just how powerful he was. And that misaligned motivation resulted in a devastating plague.
So the numbers themselves are completely neutral. It's the heart behind the counting that matters.
Exactly. We see this play out in the book of Acts, too. When it records that 3,000 people were baptized in a single day, those numbers are functioning as descriptive testimonies. Right. They describe a moment of incredible work that God did. But they are not prescriptive targets for humans to try and engineer the following week. The principle is that numbers should testify to what has happened, not justify human ambition.
That distinction is wild. A descriptive testimony versus a prescriptive target. It actually makes me think about the parables that are referenced later on.
A parable logic.
Yeah, how does that parable logic fit into this whole idea of ownership and ambition?
Well, if you look at the parables of the talents, the vineyard, or the soils, there is a unified tension. In every scenario, the resources, the opportunities, the land, they do not belong to the steward.
Right.
The master gives the talents and leaves. The landowner leases the vineyard. The sower scatters the seed. Ownership rests entirely with God.
But the expectation of accountability is still incredibly high.
Yes, you are not the owner, yet your obligation to steward what you have been given is entirely real. But what is freeing about this framework is that it provides accountability without the crushing anxiety of a market economy.
I see the appeal of that, I really do. But let's be real for a second. If I go to my board of directors or my executive team and tell them my quarterly numbers are down, but my spiritual stewardship is great, they might fire me.
They very well might.
So how does this framework expect leaders to navigate that tension in the real world?
It's a very real tension. The key is understanding that biblical accountability is vertical first. It is directed toward God before it is directed toward a board or public opinion.
Vertical accountability.
Yes. Remember, when the master returns in the parable of the talents, his commendation to the successful servant isn't well done, good, and effective servant.
Right, it's faithful.
Exactly. Well done, good and faithful servant.
Yeah.
It evaluates the servant based on their faithfulness to what was specifically entrusted to them, not in comparison to the guy down the street who got 10 talents.
So accountability isn't just a corporate system of surveillance.
No, not at all. It flows out of relationship and trust.
But when we get those metrics wrong, when we start prioritizing the corporate surveillance over the vertical faithfulness, it actually changes us.
It certainly does.
There's that old saying that what you measure is what you reward. But the warning here from the source goes a step further. It argues that our dashboards and our quarterly reports actually disciple us. They shape who we are as leaders.
How so?
Well, if you are only measuring weekend attendance and weekly revenue, your brain is naturally going to drift toward optimizing for crowds.
That makes sense.
You will start designing your entire organizational structure for maximum reach, and you will do it at the direct expense of deep, patient discipleship. The metrics themselves start shaping the heart of the leader to crave a crowd rather than a community.
That is a subtle but dangerous drift.
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting. To combat that drift, there's this concept introduced called the invisible things God refuses to ignore.
I love this part. It requires a profound shift in perspective. In a culture that only validates what is public, scalable, and trending, we have to remember that it is often invisible obedience that shapes eternity.
Yeah.
Think about the defining moments of major biblical figures. They almost always happen completely out of the public eye.
Like Daniel praying privately in his room when it was outlawed.
Exactly. Or Joseph maintaining his integrity while enslaved and imprisoned in Egypt.
Right.
Anna the prophetess serving quietly in a temple for decades, unseen by the masses. The widow offering her 2 small coins. These invisible qualities, humility, perseverance, hidden obedience, these are the metrics of heaven.
They form the root system.
Yes, they form the root system that eventually produces any visible fruit.
It totally changes how you view success. And maybe more importantly, it completely changes how you view failure. We are so conditioned to think that if a project doesn't grow or if a plan falls apart, it's a total loss.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this perspective actually redeems the entire concept of failure.
Yes. Because if you look at the heroes of the faith, they experienced apparent spectacular collapses. Jonah, Peter, Moses, Elijah.
All of them.
By modern corporate metrics, their ministries were massive failures at various points.
But because they ultimately maintained or returned to obedience, those moments were utilized. The text calls this collapse as purification.
Collapse as purification. Wow.
It is a profound realization. True failure is not the absence of visible fruit. True failure is the absence of obedience.
That is huge.
If you refuse to compromise your integrity and your organization shrinks as a direct result, that is not a failure. That is faithfulness.
Okay, so this all sounds incredibly inspiring. It's deeply challenging, but how do we actually do it? I mean, we can't just throw our hands up, toss out the spreadsheets and say, well, God knows my heart, so I don't need to track anything.
No, you can't.
We still have to operate in reality.
And that is exactly where the balanced missional metrics framework comes in. It's designed to help leaders integrate spiritual discernment with actual operational clarity.
Right.
You don't abandon metrics. You balance them across 4 specific pillars.
Let's break those down because this is the real practical meat of the discussion. What is the first pillar?
The first pillar is faithfulness metrics. This asks the foundational question, are we doing what God asked?
That sounds a bit subjective, though. How do you measure that on a practical level?
Well, you measure alignment with Scripture, the integrity of the leadership, and the ethical stewardship of resources.
Go.
It's evaluating whether the teaching and the daily actions of the organization are consistent with biblical truth, regardless of whether it is popular or profitable. It's essentially a health check on your core operational ethics.
Got it. Okay, the second pillar is formation metrics. This asks, are people becoming more like Christ? But again, how do you put a number on character?
This one shifts the focus from output to interior growth. You measure relational health. Are people reconciling with one another when there is conflict? Is there a reduction in gossip? Are your teams growing in humility and maturity and discernment? You might track engagement in prayer or smaller community groups, but you're looking for evidence of relational transformation, not just attendance.
Which is much harder to track than just counting who showed up on a Sunday.
Much harder,
Yeah.
but far more indicative of actual health.
Okay, the third pillar, missional impact metrics. This asks, is the kingdom advancing beyond us? But I have to ask, doesn't this sound a lot like just counting crowds again?
It can, if you aren't careful. But the key difference here is measuring lives genuinely transformed versus just lives reached.
Reached, yeah, that's a big buzzword.
Exactly. It's about communities tangibly restored. And most importantly, it tracks the reproduction of disciples, or the people you are leading turning around and leading others. True missional impact is multiplication, not just addition.
That makes total sense. And that brings us to the fourth pillar, which might actually be my favorite, sustainability metrics. This asks the vital question, can this faithfulness endure?
Kingdom work is not a sprint. This pillar measures whether the structures and the people can persevere for the long haul.
So we are talking about preventing burnout here.
Exactly. It tracks leadership succession plans, it monitors the health and workload of volunteers,
Yeah,
and it requires absolute financial transparency and resilience.
right.
If you are burning out your staff to hit a missional impact metric, you are failing the sustainability metric. The framework demands balance.
It is such a holistic way to look at an organization, and there is a beautiful illustrative story included in the text that really brings this to life. It's called The Hidden Vineyard.
A perfect example of these metrics in action.
Right, so it describes a small, rural church where the attendance graphs had been completely flat for decades.
Flat as a board.
Yeah, if a modern consultant walked in and looked at their annual reports, they would say the place was stagnant, dead in the water.
A failure by market standards.
Exactly. But the pastor of this church had made incredibly deep, patient, relational investments in the people there. And over those decades, because of that hidden labor, marriages that were on the brink of divorce were fully restored.
Which you can't put on a simple graph.
You can't. Young adults were deeply discipled, they moved away, and eventually became faithful leaders in other cities. Generational faith was secured in families that had been really struggling.
By a modern market economy metric, that pastor failed. But under the balanced framework we just discussed, he excelled in faithfulness, formation, missional impact, and sustainability.
All four pillars.
Yes, the impact was generational, even if the weekly attendance never once spiked.
Long-term, profound fruit that simply cannot be graphed on a quarterly dashboard.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? When we take all of these concepts, the two economies, the parable logic, the invisible obedience, the redeemed failures, and this balanced four-pillar framework, what is the ultimate takeaway for us?
The ultimate takeaway is that measurement should never be a system of fear, coercion, or surveillance. When measurement flows from a place of true biblical stewardship, it actually becomes a sacramental expression of love.
Meaning it becomes an act of worship. It's a way of aligning ourselves with what God values, rather than just a cold audit of our performance.
Precisely. It is about checking our alignment, not proving our worth to the world. And to facilitate that kind of worshipful evaluation, the text offers 3 spirit-led questions for leaders to ask themselves and their teams.
Let's hear them.
First, what should we continue? This helps identify the practices that consistently reflect God's priorities.
Second, what must we release? Which is usually the hardest one. It's about discerning what is actually hindering obedience or unity, and having the courage to let it go, even if it's a really popular program.
And this raises an important point for the third question. What is God inviting us to deepen? Yes. This acknowledges that growth is often hidden and relational. It's an invitation for God to refine character and cultivate unseen fruit before demanding visible results.
It all builds to this incredibly grounding reality at the very end. A reminder that one day, all of our dashboards, all of our impressive charts, our meticulously managed spreadsheets, and the public applause, it will all completely fade away.
It will.
And when we stand before the true measure, the only question that will carry any eternal weight is simply, were you faithful with what I entrusted to you?
It is the ultimate leveling of the playing field.
Truly. So, as we wrap up today's deep dive, we want to leave you listening with a final, lingering thought to ponder on your own.
Something to really sit with.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about organizational leadership and ministry dashboards today. But what happens if you apply this exact same framework to your personal life?
Oh, that's good.
If all the external metrics, the dashboards, and the public applause in your life completely vanish tomorrow, what specific invisible evidence would you look for to prove that your daily work still carries profound meaning?
That is a phenomenal question to carry forward. Keep seeking the truth behind the numbers.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you some powerful new lenses for how you measure what matters. We will catch you next time.